I'll try and get it right this time. Matt Kerr, who's a Labour councillor from Glasgow, O'Donnell. Matt is from View Cinema. They're in dispute. Daniel is from a Village Hotel. I think some of you will know Dawn from Women Supporting Women. Chris Stevens, who's a former SNP MP, right, from Glasgow South West and media. I'm not sure.
I'm from Rojava to talk about the situation in Kurdistan.
Now we've got mics here, so if anybody wants to. So how will we do it? I'll stay to the left.
Just go
I'll stay to the left.
Stage left? Sure.
Yes.
Thanks very much. I apologise in advance, just in case I get a coughing fit. I've caught something across the last few days. I think it may have something to do with Burns Night and some drams. But I want to thank Clydebank Trades Union Council for inviting us along tonight. I think the first thing I would like to say is that this Trades Union Council is clearly one of the most active on the front line of the battle against the far right. That should be happening all over the country, but is unfortunately not. But it is well truly happening here. I've been along a few of the stalls, maybe not enough for Tam's liking, right enough. But I've been along a few of the stalls on Monday lunchtimes up at the shopping centre, and well, firstly, the reaction you get. The important thing about these sorts of things is actually you get conversations with actual real human beings rather than politicians talking to other politicians and all the rest of that, right? So you're actually talking to actual people with actual opinions, which can actually be somewhat disconcerting sometimes, and sometimes they be challenging, and sometimes not. Sometimes you learn a lot, but it's a very, very important exercise, and it's far more strength in that, I think, than necessarily standing up with a loudhailer and yelling at some demos that occur. That's not to say I don't think the demonstrations should not happen. I think there's always a place for standing toe-to-toe with the far right, and I'm more than happy to do that. Done it in the past, to do it again. And those of us that are able to do so need to be prepared to do so. But actually, if we're going to get under the skin of this problem, and if we're going to actually really deal with it, we need to deal with its causes. And overwhelmingly, its cause is alienation, and that's alienation from the political process completely. Now, I'm standing here, I'm a Labour councillor, and Chris over there is from the SNP. Both of our parties, I'll speak for my own party, he can speak for us in a minute. But in fact, I won't speak for my party, because you're about to find out. I think the Labour Party has been utterly pitiful in its response to the far right. In fact, it's worse than pitiful, it's actually stoked the fire. Right? I think the way that Starmer has behaved as Prime Minister and as Leader of the Opposition before that has been utterly outrageous. What he has done is repeatedly, rather than actually challenging some of the far right narrative, he's agreed with it. And then acted surprised when people, given the choice of one far right narrative or another far right narrative on things like immigration, they choose to pick the real thing, which is, if you're into that kind of thing, is reform. What needs to be happening is that narrative needs to be challenged. And any politician worth their salt, doesn't matter what party you're in, needs to be challenging that kind of narrative, because it is deeply corrosive in our society. The challenges that people face in some communities are getting directed towards migrants. And I use that term, that broader term. So you have, obviously there are different shades of migrant in that sense. You have people who are here seeking refuge. You have people who are come here to work and have come here. People label them economic migrants. Incidentally, that particular form of migration is what brought my grandfather to this country. It's what brought half of Glasgow to Scotland. it is utter nonsense to claim that that is in of itself a terrible thing. What is a terrible thing? It's for those migrants to be exploited. People will talk to you about how migrants coming to this country will undermine wages and undermine terms and conditions for the workforce. Well, I tell you what, if an unscrupulous employer, and there are many of them, wants to do that, aye, they'll do that. That's what they've been doing for centuries. 4 centuries. This is not a new phenomenon. The person to blame for that is not the migrant worker who's trying to earn a crust and actually trying to feed their family and trying to make a better life for themselves. The person to blame for that is the person who's creaming off the profits at the other end of that spectrum. The person to blame for that is the ruthless employer. They're the exploiter and they're our enemy, no one else. If you don't challenge that, then nothing on this earth is worth challenging. And that's the root cause of this. If we accept that narrative, if we accept that the world has to work that way, then it's perfectly acceptable to drive people into the dirt and then blame them for being in the dirt when they get there, then we end up with the far right explicitly in power, not just owning the narrative as they do at present. Because right now this country is heading towards a reform government at UK level. Make no doubt about that. And tell you what, in Scotland we're heading towards a reform opposition in May. Official opposition, that is, second place party. That's what's on the agenda at this point. And the only thing that's going to stop that, I would love to say to you, stand here in front of you today, there's a political party you can vote for at that election that could sweep all that away. I can't bring that kind of hope to you in that sense. I think, well-meaning as he may be, I think John Swinney's handling of the situation has been cat-handed. I do think he does mean well, but when he held that summit to tackle the far right, all he did was fuel reform, because they were able to say, look at that cosy wee consensus, that cosy wee cynic Scotland elite that's sitting around that table talking about us, and we're not at the table. We are the anti-establishment people. If you give them the opportunity, the ultimate establishment party, to describe themselves as the anti-establishment party, when people are feeling as alienated as they are now, you're fueling it, I'm afraid. And I say that, I might be in a different political party from him, but I do think his efforts were sincere in that, but I think they were misguided. As for the Labour Party, it's not in Scotland, I don't think it's even on frankly, it's not even on the battlefield. It's not even on the bloody battlefield. And I'll give you a key example of that battlefield. Just a couple of years back, we had a standoff that lasted a year down at Erskine. I talk about this a lot because I think this is a really significant moment and really, really instructive in terms of what can be done in tackling the far right. We had a hotel there that was on its backside, frankly, that was being kept open because it was being used to house people seeking asylum. When that happened, a little stall ended up outside, a little protest of sorts ended up outside. There were some far-right activists, just a handful, mind, who'd come from out hither and thither. One of them was travelling from Skye every weekend to do this. Quite incredible. Well, that's commitment for you, isn't it? He knew what he was doing. Came all the way down there every weekend, and he stirred his hate in Erskine. He went round those areas and he told people, the reason you can't get using that swimming pool in that hotel anymore is because of these migrants. These terrible people. And by the way, they're all men, and they're all fighting-age men, and stuff all over Facebook. In fact, the first time I became aware of it was when I saw a Facebook post saying, there are 200 fighting-age men have turned up in Erskine and have been sent by the UN to take over. It's obviously nonsense. And we can maybe have a wee giggle at it. Here's the problem though. Some people believe that. But whether or not they believe that, I'll tell you what they did believe. They believed that they couldn't get using that swimming pool anymore. So rather than getting angry at their local council for not having a swimming pool, rather than getting angry at the council or this government or whatever it is about the lack of housing for young people coming through in that area, they found their scapegoats. And there was people ready there to show them and give them the leaflets telling them this is the problem. And what happened was the Trades Council, the Paisley District Trades Council, along with myriad other organisations, and I do say this, across the political, not the far right, of course, but across the political spectrum, were actually there, and they were there every week. All sorts of bits of the left that quite often don't like to talk to each other very much, if I'm honest. We're all managed to hold it together, weekend after weekend. It was very encouraging, it gives me some hope. And over time, what happened was, it started off with screaming at each other. And the people in the hotel didn't want to come out either, who can blame them, right? But after a few months, what happened was we were talking to some of the locals that had been in that group, and they changed their minds. And they'd either stopped turning up, or even a couple of them came across. And the people in the hotel were coming out, and they were talking to us, and they were eating with us. We even had a football tournament, right? And we actually, that was genuine solidarity built there. It wasn't just two sets of people who don't like each other shouting at each other while terrified people huddle in a hotel. It was genuine class solidarity. That's the kind of thing that only a trades council can do. A political party isn't capable of doing that. Any political party isn't capable of doing that on their own. Not even a single trade union is capable of doing that on their own. But a trades council can do that. They can reach the parts that others can't reach, and they are a forum for bringing people together in that way. And so I would say to you that, just from my little experience in this, we can be part of all our own organisations. We can be part, I would say to you, and do it. Join your community council, join your tenants, residents associations, wherever they may be. Get involved in your union branch. For goodness sake, get involved in your union branch. Too few people turn up to their union branches. And there are a lot of people, sadly to say, members of the trade union movement, who are susceptible to far-right narratives now because they are feeling so alienated and left behind in the workplace. Get into your branches, organise, speak, open your mouth, challenge things when they're said, whether it be in the bus queue or in your workplace. Because if they don't, they take hold. And we're already far down that road. So do that. And once you've done that, get your union branch affiliated to your trade union council and get along to your trade union council and do something about it and organise. Because we cannot rely on politicians to solve this for us. And I'm saying this as one, right? They're not going to do it, right? Some of them will say good things, fair enough. Good luck to them, and I hope more of them do it. But we're so far down the road now, frankly, that it is actually only activism on the ground that's going to change this narrative and change it fundamentally. And it starts with your neighbours, your friends, your communities, and it starts now. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
A couple of seats on this side, standing.
Thank you.
Right about starting trade councils, trade unions as well.
I'm in favour of it.
I mean, I'm retired, but I'm still part of my union. So it's,
As it should be, yeah. Absolutely.
Max, do you want to enlighten us on the problems that you...
Yeah, no bother. So I'm currently part of the strike at the U Cinema in St Enoch Centre. Our dispute is we've got 4 key sort of demands that we're looking for. We're looking for the real living wage. We're looking for safe and subsidised travel home after closes. I mean, we can be in there from like 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the morning some nights. We're looking for union recognition, and we're looking for better contracted hours. View runs off a model of giving people 4-hour contracts instead of 0 hours, so it makes them look better than all the other sort of hospitality jobs that give 0-hour contracts. Everybody's on a minimum wage with the 10 and the 12.24. Can't live off of it. Everybody's doing the exact same job, but there's those younger are getting less. union recognition view has never had to deal with a strike before and never had to deal with anyone unionising because they put in their contracts that they don't recognise unions. We've seen throughout this dispute that they clearly don't understand how unions work and how industrial strike action works. They are not coming to the table to speak to us. They've said that they don't want to deal with ACAS, which is obviously the middleman that you talk to sort of get negotiations started. They don't want to do that. They're repeatedly, I think they're on their 4th or 5th sort of hire of scab labour at the moment, and we've only been out for a month and a bit. So they either don't have enough scabs to function, or they can't keep their scabs either. Yeah, I mean, we've been doing videos to sort of tell everybody how like our dispute has been going. I've been looking at the comments. It's quite clear that it is the far right that have a problem with our simple sort of asks. I think everybody should be entitled to having the living wage, should be entitled to getting safe transport home, especially considering the City Nook Centre is now, the sort of area around the City Nook Centre is classed as the most dangerous part of Glasgow. So workers are 18 to 20 odd, and they're walking home at night. There's been times I've had to walk 2.5 hours home to Annie's Land because I don't have the money for a taxi. It's very clear by looking at the sort of comments that it is the far right that have the issues with what we're demanding. And it's younger people as well who are getting this off their parents, and they're hearing this sort of rhetoric that we don't deserve what we're asking for, and they don't deserve what they should be entitled to. They feel like they can't unionise. I know View right now is doing a bit of like sort of victimisation with telling anybody who's currently working in all of their sites across the UK that they'll lose their job due to bullying and harassment if they talk about the ongoing strike or unionising, which I think is pretty foul, especially for a company that, as much as some people say that 25 million is not a lot, and it is the far right that says that 25 million is not a lot of money. If I had 25 million, my life would be in a very different place for a company that's constantly expanding. It's clear that especially like the younger people who are susceptible to this, they just don't, like, we need to sort of stand up and organise in workplaces so that we can sort of get this over with. I don't know what else to say, but thank you for listening.
It's just unfortunate that there's a lot of employers who don't recognise unions, because you're better off being in a group rather than individually.
Yeah.
And I think it's up to, I don't know how we could get round all the trade unions to back you. You know, it's just a case of getting in touch with different folk.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll certainly take it to my own union, you know, get you some support. I'm going to jump across because I'll have this and then back to you, Cameron, is that right?
Okay, thanks very much. Well, good evening everybody. Chris Stevens, former Member of Parliament. Obviously there's nothing more former than being a former Member of Parliament. But I still have a lot to say. And I was staggered today, but not too surprised when I saw that the most evil, hard right-wing Conservative Member of Parliament has joined Reform UK. Now, what were the chances of that, folks, eh? Well, it's what she said, I think, that staggered me. That she had said that she was going to expose the 14 years of Tory lies, that Britain is broken, and that we need change in the country. Now, Suella Braverman and all these other Tory defectors are responsible for the fact that in the last 14 years that they've made the country broken, that they have broken our social security system, they have broken a lot of the government machinery, and that they are responsible, quite frankly, for the cost of living crisis. And it really is, quite remarkable that we hear these politicians all jumping to reform, but they're jumping to reform to fix the mess that they created in life for everybody else. And we need to continue to expose that. But here are the facts about why it's so serious, and why we need to take on the far right. When I was a member of Parliament, we were always consistently told that the intelligence security services said the biggest threat to UK security wasn't Russia, it wasn't China, it wasn't even these nationalists in Scotland trying to separate the United Kingdom. It is the far right, and the far right behaviour and far right actions. And I want to know, because there was a very good piece of this in The Guardian last week, we need to know what the Home Office and the Foreign Office are doing with some of these characters. Because the far right activists aren't just causing problems here. We have far right activists from Britain travelling to northern France, engaging in far right activity, which includes, by the way, putting soap in water containers so that asylum seekers and those seeking sanctuary can't drink water, breaking water containers, getting into water tanks and polluting them, visiting sleeping spaces to annoy those individuals. And frankly, that's criminal activity. And I want to know what the British state is doing to stop these far-right criminals travelling to France to engage in that far-right activity. And they should also be telling us exactly what they're doing about the far-right activity here at home. And that, for me, does include they are going to have to, in my view, introduce buffer zones into asylum accommodation, because it is absolutely despicable what the far right are doing in some of these places, where they are, on one hand, saying, as Matt had touched on, that they're all men, we have to protect women and children, but women and children in asylum accommodation are being threatened and abused by these far right animals. And I do think that there is a responsibility for all of us to write to members of Parliament and ask what the Home Office and the Foreign Office are doing. And it comes down to the rhetoric that they have, isn't it? That everything's out of control, that it's economic migrants, and deliberately not distinguishing between an asylum seeker, a refugee, and an economic migrant. One of the best things ever, and we were actually, it was a podcast that I did with Matt a couple of weeks ago, which I explained this. One of the most joyous things I've seen was two former Rangers players in a Catholic primary school in Govan explaining to children the difference between an asylum seeker, a refugee, and an economic migrant, and put it in very simple terms about football. Rudy Vata was an asylum seeker who had played for Celtic. He was playing for Albania, he feigned injury, stayed in the dressing room at half time, climbed over a window at the Parc des Princes, and went to the police station across the road to claim asylum. Then you have refugees. He then becomes a refugee when his asylum status is accepted. He is then a refugee. And then they asked the kids, the centre forward for Celtic at the time was Dembele, what's he? And they were able to say he's an economic migrant, he's here to work. Now if you listen to Reform, and I think that we should be asking all these Reform candidates, see all these players that are playing for the Old Firm at the moment, do you think that they should be here? Because they are, in actual fact, economic migrants. And if you're opposed to all these economic migrants, then perhaps you should be telling Celtic Rangers not to sign these people and to play British players. But you never hear a Reform activist argue that particular case, do you? We're told also that the welfare system, and I hate that phrase, we don't have a welfare system, we have a social security system, that it's out of control and that it's a magnet for asylum seekers. Well, that's wrong on a number of counts. The first reason it's wrong is because the UK has consistently spent, over the last 15 years, 10 to 12% of GDP on its social security system. It's never left those percentages. And by the way, that's less, in GDP terms, that's less than what's been spent on social security in France, Germany, Italy, and the Republic of Ireland. So it's not the case that all these people are coming to Britain because we have such a generous social security system. If you were to ask anybody who's on the social security system, they would tell you that it's not particularly generous at all. And of course, asylum seekers don't get social security benefit. They're not entitled to social security benefit. Asylum seekers are entitled to £49.18 a week. That's the equivalent, folks, of what youth trainees were being paid 30 years ago. So we're asking the old YTS person like me, 30 odd, well, more than 30 years ago now, asking them to earn the equivalent. We're asking the asylum seekers to live on that as an equivalent, the old YTS wages. And of course, if they're in a hotel, asylum seekers are paid £9.95 a week. That's not very much at all to spend on their living costs at all. We need to tackle this, folks. Asylum seekers are not to blame for the fact that energy companies are bumping up your electricity bill or your gas bill. They're not to blame for that. They're not to blame for the fact that there's so many vacancies in workplaces. There's 2 million vacancies in workplaces, and yet we don't give asylum seekers the right to work. I think that if asylum seekers are here for 6 months and you've worked out that they aren't engaged in terrorism, then give them the right to work, give them the right to contribute to the country, give them the right to contribute, and then that would defeat this argument that all these people who are coming here are a drain on our society and a drain on our systems. That is a complete nonsense. Asylum seekers should be given that right to work, because you'll find some of them will be able to work in public services because they are qualified doctors and the rest. But I think the most sickening part of all for me is what happened just before the general election. There was a constituent in Glasgow South West who had been detained. He had turned up at his regular Home Office appointment, and he's sitting in the room, and 10 coppers jump on him and put him in a van to take him down south. Now, why did they do that? It's because he came into the country, as they put it, illegally. Now, for me, I really hate this phrase. There is no such thing as an illegal human being. We are all human beings as far as I'm concerned. But because he had entered the country in an illegal way, according to the government, they wanted to detain him. But here's the thing. His lawyers were able to prove that person was tortured. And so, therefore, we now spend too much time debating and arguing about how people got here and not the substance of their actual claim. So if someone was to come here on a legal basis, but as a criminal or a trafficker, then that seems to be okay, because all these people are coming here by so-called illegal routes. They're the first ones that should be left. That's crazy to me. Why should that criminal and trafficker, because they got here in legal means, be treated more specially than someone who is coming here frightened, tortured, and has come here because someone has told them, if you give me a lot of money, I can get you over my dinghy. It's not right, is it? So we need to take them on in their arguments. We need to take them on, particularly reform, because I am really scared about reform. I'm really scared about what 20 plus individuals in that Scottish Parliament will come away with. There's a lot of things in the Scottish Parliament that, you know, you hear that are crazy, but there's more craziness to come if you get 20 of these characters come. They are opposed to any view and viewpoint that boosts minority rights. The biggest supporters of minority rights in this country were and are and always will be the trade union movement. And we need to support that trade union movement. We need to continue to hear from you to support that trade union movement, and we need to support the trade unions and organisations like Refugee Action, who are raising all these points because we are going to defeat the far right by facts and facts alone. Thanks very much.
I agree with you. There is a misconception that the asylum seekers and refugees are causing the cost of living crisis. And I mean, that's something we just got to get out. They're not, that's not the problem. Daniel, do you want to let us know about your dispute?
Hi everyone, so I'm Daniel. I work at the Village Hotel in Glasgow, and this is the second time now that we've been on strike. So just to give a really brief overview of that, Village are a huge company that last year were bought over by Blackstone for £850 million. This is Blackstone are the planet's largest assets management firm. You know, they manage assets worth over $1.1 trillion US. So Village are a really lucrative employer. They're massive. They have sites all across the UK. We were on strike last year because there was a pay disparity that affected predominantly younger women under 21 compared with their male comparators in Glasgow. It's not the first pay disparity we've had, and ultimately this is something they refused to fix. They were really intransigent about it. They had no interests. The wording that we had from the General Counsel for Village at the time was that they could see no benefit in meeting with us to remedy this and to pay people equally. So that was what we went on strike for, and it's something that we were able to fully win. It was fully fixed. People got up to £3,000 because of that in backdated pay. So that was something that we were able to do that really helped to protect the most vulnerable, lowest paid employees in our workplace. The very same month after we came back from strike, bearing in mind that throughout the dispute, the CEO would persistently put to us that, you know, it's such a big ask, money's such a problem, notwithstanding the assets they have from Blackstone, they don't have the ability to do this. The very same month we returned from strike action, the CEO said in an interview that, and his exact words were that, the great thing about being with Blackstone is that money is not the problem. And that's true. That's probably one of the only times he's told the truth when we've had any sort of engagement with him. That is what has given rise to us going on strike again. Our demands are very similar to what Mark's outlined for you. We seek merely to be paid regardless of age at the real living wage, because everyone deserves a real living wage. It's bonkers that an employer, particularly an employer that's as lucrative and massive as Village, would seriously purport to its workforce that not only can they not afford to do it, but that they shouldn't do it. So our demands are really, simple. They're really rudimentary, and it's something that unfortunately we've been on strike for over a month now for. So linking this back to what obviously we're here to discuss. I mean, I work in a hotel. Obviously, hotels have been quite a large part of this discussion. Village, for the most part, Village actually don't house any asylum seekers or refugees or anyone like that. But that doesn't stop people who cross our picket line trying to argue these narratives, trying to shout at us about, the only reason you're out on strike is because there's immigrants that are undermining your labour, there's too many people coming into the country, the value of your labour therefore has gone down, that's why you're being paid less. So it's something that we, our members on strike have persistently had to endure on the picket line. But as I said, this is the second time we've now went out on strike, and when it comes to dealing with these sort of narratives, it's not really too far off dealing with the same narratives that are put by unscrupulous employers. Employers obviously want to set the narrative to their workplaces, especially workplaces like hospitality, where there's not really any trade union activity, there's very little of it. They want to try and retain this narrative that they just can't do it. The norm for hospitality is that you're paid minimum wage, you're paid differently based on age. If there's pay disparities, you just need to get along with it, and that they can't do anything about it. And that's the narrative that employers generally throughout hospitality try to adopt. And so when it comes to organising industrially, the approach that you need to take to that, which is similar to the approach that ought to be taken when it comes to dealing with the far right, is that you need to fight that with the facts. You need to know the reality of the situation. You need to be able to say to your co-workers, the reason that you are paid what you're paid, the reason you're paid less than your co-worker over there, isn't because they can't afford it. They can afford it, it's because they have different material interests from what you have. So the first time, comparing our strike now with the first strike we had in August last year, we've over doubled our membership now, and I think that part of that, the primary reason for that is because we won our last strike, and people, as I said, people got up to £3,000 in backdated pay. It was a huge material win for the workforce. But another reason why we were able to double our membership and go out on strike with twice as many members this time round is because of the approach that we took last time. We didn't take the approach where we would be belligerent or aggressive towards other employees who the first time round chose not to go out on strike, because that isn't the way that you win that argument. That's the employer wants you to add to that division. They want to create that divide where the people inside absolutely do not go out, and the best way to achieve that is if those that do go out on strike are belligerent towards those inside. So when we were on strike the first time, that's something that we didn't do at all, and in fact we actually made a point of communicating with the people inside. When we returned back from strike after we won, we were able to have that conversation more. We spoke to them. Nobody was being aggressive or belligerent about the fact that you crossed the picket line last time, because that's just going to make people more entrenched and intransigent. They're not going to then think, well, you've been aggressive to me about this, and then that's not how you convince people to come out on strike again. So because of that approach, because we took a more fact-based approach, we then had the material win to go by, we were able to double our membership, and people felt more comfortable joining us out on strike the second time. Had we gone down the route of being aggressive, shouting to people, calling them scabs, even though they may well have been, that wouldn't have helped, and they would not have come out on strike the second time, and we would not have had the same sort of industrial power that we're enjoying at the moment. So when it comes to the far right, a similar approach needs to be adopted, where you don't, and you see it a lot, and standing on the street in rallies and shouting at people, calling them Nazis, neo-Nazis or whatever else, isn't productive. And there will of course be neo-Nazis, the main agitators, the main organisers that are responsible for this. And Patriotic Alternative, an example of that, they're actually a group that Village have had allowed to have meetings in their hotels in Birmingham before, recently actually. It's not like the approach that needs to be taken with the far right is a similar approach that has to be taken industrially. You can shout at people who have been misled, who genuinely have seen no alternative. These are working class people who are in the same position as anyone else, who have been offered nothing, and it's only logical that they're then going to turn to groups like Reform, UK or PA or anyone else, and they're going to then adopt those narratives because they're not being offered anything else. So when we shout at these people, we call them Nazis, we ignorant or whatever else, it's the same as being on strike and calling, being belligerent towards those that are inside. It doesn't help. They're not going to see reason in that, they're not going to come across, and they're not going to stop what they're doing. It's just going to make them more entrenched in their views. So what I've learned personally from the 2 strikes I've now led in village hotels is that when it comes to tackling any sort of narrative, whether it's a sort of capitalist narrative set by an unscrupulous employer, or whether it's a narrative set by Reform UK or any other far right group, it's that you need to approach it from a fact-based approach. You need to also recognise that the people you're speaking to aren't themselves necessarily going to be the same far right folks that are on this leaflet. They're going to be just normal working class people that have genuinely been offered nothing else. So Max has again spoken about the sort of issues they've had to view in the picket line. It's similar to Glasgow, and our members, because of the approach we've taken, not only do they now understand for themselves that, you know, Reform UK offer them nothing, but they now also understand the approach that they need to take when they're in a position where they're speaking to like a Reform UK supporter or any other working class person that hasn't been offered any other alternative. And Matt obviously spoke about that as well. The reason that we're in this position is because they've been offered nothing else. The government have, you know, the Labour Party have performed really, really poorly on this. They've exacerbated the situation and they've allowed it to become what it is by moving more and more and more to the right and creating that legitimacy for groups like Reform UK. So I think from an industrial perspective, the approach that we've taken really is quite similar to what has to be taken, like socially within communities and politically when we have these discussions with people. So I think that from our perspective, going through industrial disputes, what we have observed is that just speaking to people like human beings, recognising the conditions that they're under, the reason why they've come to these conclusions, that's what's going to allow you to put the best possible argument to them, and that's what's going to allow you to actually undermine the credibility of these groups.
I think it's up to us to get the word out and support these young people, because they are the future. You know, I've stood in a few picket lines myself, and it's the only way you sort of get anywhere. It's just unfortunate that a lot of the young people don't have unions to back them. But I think it's up to us to get the word out there and give them the support that they need. Dawn, would you?
Thanks very much. Thanks very much to the Trade Union Council again, and thanks for you to put up them again. Thank you. We're here from Clydebank Women Supporting Women, and we were established after the closure of Clydebank Women's Aid. And we believe this discussion is needed for several reasons. And today's question is, how do we tackle the far right and reform in the UK? And it's amazed me over the last few months how difficult this question is. I've been to a number of meetings now where it's been discussed, and each time there's disagreement in the room, and you can hear a little bit of it in the panel tonight as well, about what we're dealing with. Are we dealing with core racists who want our communities to be divided and hateful, or misguided individuals who have been manipulated by the media and so-called politicians? And the truth's probably somewhere in the middle, isn't it? But then I looked to America, it had to be brought up, and I realised that it doesn't matter the motivations, it's the impact of the behaviour that's important. When Donald Trump won the election for the second time, I was horrified, not necessarily because he had won, but because so many people had voted for him. It terrified me to think that despite his openness about misogyny and racism and disableism, that people thought he was the right choice to the president, and I don't think we're far off that here. I do think they didn't realise how bad it could get. I think they thought they might have a feisty Obama, open and honest about his intentions, however hideous they were. But watching that deterioration over the last few months, I've learned so much, and it's really influenced me terribly. We asked ourselves, did the Germans know what direction Germany was taking under Hitler? Did they not know? Were they misguided? It seems we have an answer now when we look towards America. When in crisis, human beings often double down and capitulate to authority. Scare people, and there were a period of time where they bent to authoritarianism. But as can be seen in Minneapolis, that only lasts so long. Something happens that makes people feel more unsafe under authoritarianism than they do outside and confronting it. Where the security of their community feels safer than those structures that they have all been brought up to accept as our protectors. But are we willing to wait until we have our own Rennie Good or our Alex Pretty or the other 7 Black and Latino people who have been killed by ICE in the last year? Are we willing to wait for that to happen? We also have to remember that people live under authoritarianism in this country already. Those humiliated for claiming benefits that are rightly theirs, those caught up in the criminal justice system that sentences some communities more harshly than others, those women living with domestic abuse or in communities like our own where violence against women is at epidemic levels. They are ripe to be convinced by that reform and others that reforming their ilk know the answer. The threat is from our new Scots coming here, looking for a better life or just safety, and how dare they have that when I don't. But just because we understand what tools reform etc. are using to convince people, doesn't mean that we don't confront it. I find myself continuously having to justify myself, explaining that I don't mean shouting and bawling at people on the street, yet at the same time very few of the same concerns are aimed at those who would divide our community. Never once in any discussion has someone that I consider to be a comrade raised concerns that my image has been edited and uploaded to Patriots Alternate's website. More concern is shown that I might hurt the feelings of the people who are giving this movement credence, and I think we have to be very careful about that. We know how history works, we know who we're dealing with. We need to agree in these rooms, and I think most of us do, that this behaviour is not acceptable and learn together how to confront it. This takes discussion and planning, moving forward together. From a Clydebank Women Supporting Women perspective, violence against women cannot be used to justify racism. The downright lies that have been used to justify hatred of whole communities is appalling and does not protect women and children. It does actually, as we've seen over the past few years, create an environment where everyone is more at risk, women and children being the most vulnerable. Violence against women and girls is at epidemic levels in Scotland. In 23-24 there were over 63,800 domestic abuse incidents reported to the police. That is not the total number of domestic abuse incidents, that's only the ones the police know about. In some areas, rape and sexual assault reports have risen by more than 300%. In this very community, we've seen huge increases in violence against women, all while the services are being slashed. The very services women and children rely on to escape and recover from violence are now under threat more than at any other point in their 60-year history. Add a criminal justice system that routinely fails survivors, and the warning signs could not be clearer. Unless we act now and confront it, things will worsen and women will become more vulnerable to reform's lies, as it is then easy to convince women who are fearful or experiencing violence and abuse that it's safer to agree with the authoritarians than it is to be outside alone. And I think that's what terrifies me about the reform increase in both parliaments in UK and in Scotland. This dividing community spreading fear and distracting from the real drivers of abuse, misogyny, under-resourced protective services, digital platforms that enable exploitation, and institutions that fail to hold perpetrators to account requires no activity, is baseline in emotion and makes the powerless feel powerful for a couple of minutes. It has to be confronted. We need to build stronger communities, whilst at the same time hold up a mirror to people and ask them, is this who you thought you were? Did you wake up this morning and think this is who you were? Somebody was telling me recently they were speaking in Glasgow, and this woman was shouting and bawling at all these young people that were out protesting, and when she spoke to her she burst out crying. But I would put money on it, she went back to the crowd later on. Investigations and watchdog reports have repeatedly shown how far-right groups publicly claim to support survivors while using those interactions to spread anti-Muslim myths and mainstream xenophobia. They groom public opinion, not to protect women and children, but to radicalise people and normalise racism. They put on the costume of victim advocacy to win legitimacy, and then use that legitimacy to shift the conversation from prevention to exclusion. This does not help women and children, and in fact makes them more unsafe. As people are emboldened to express racism, they're emboldened to express misogyny, which includes, for some of them, the daily torture of their families through domestic abuse. In some cases, further communities are made more unsafe. Scotland's anti-trafficking organisation has estimated that men in Scotland spend 22.5 million a year buying sex from trafficked women, and that's just the women that organisation knows of. 22.5 million, I don't want to hear that there's no money. And that's just the women I know of. That is not a marginal issue, it is an absolute national disgrace. To truly protect women and girls, Scotland must back the services that have always led the way. Feminist, survivor-centred, independent organisations such as Clydebank Women's Aid. These are the very services now fighting for survival, often because they stayed true to their principles. Single-sex spaces for women escaping male violence, collective working and an unflinching analysis of patriarchy. Violence against women and children is rooted in patriarchy, and patriarchy is a key component of the right-wing movement and fascism, so destroying those very services at this point is a disaster. The right-wing movement therefore promotes the very systems it is claiming to challenge. We need to be honest. The world has changed. An election is coming up in Scotland, a time to think about where next, and it's not easy. I'm going to be honest, I don't know what I'm going to do. We are led by the least of us, in my opinion, but it is an opportunity to reflect on the messages we give our community. We cannot fall into the trap of political sound bites, ignoring their impact on the wider community. We will let the reforms of the world. Will we let the reforms of the world dominate the conversation? Will we continually begin by criticising, as UK Labour does? And I'll always remember when I was studying social work, don't end the judgment, reading that even if you criticise Freud's misogynistic theories, you are always starting with Freud. We have to stop starting with reform. We cannot let reform debase our conversation. We need to force them into discussing community needs and raising the expectations of the communities. I don't want to hear any other politician or worker telling me that people need to lower their expectations. People need to raise their expectations. It's an absolute disgrace. We need to force them into, even if that means uncomfortable confrontations of those who would normally be our allies. We're in a crisis. We need to own our analysis, rather than getting into arguments about who's better than who, but we cannot let people hide behind lies and fear. We need to increase their critical thinking and support one another whilst doing that. Every person in this room is vital, but left alone we are vulnerable to intimidation, disinformation and fear as much as the next person. And it's only by standing together, as the community of Minneapolis is doing, that we confront those who would destroy us. Thanks very much.
Thanks, George. I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like the meat in a sandwich. You get Farage on one side and Trump on the other side. And I don't want to be in that sandwich. No. But you, if I pronounce your name wrong, then I apologise.
Easy to say media, social media.
Oh, media.
Yeah. Yeah, hi everybody, and
You want the money?
okay.
This is the first time I had this, so.
Have we tried?
Oh, we've got this one on.
Oh, there's one on.
Oh, yeah.
I've got this one on.
Hi everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Media from Rojava. I come in here to tell you about what's happened in Rojava. I don't know if you hear some news. The situation is very bad. And we wanted someone hear us because we are in a very bad situation. And this what's happened is like a new genocide against the Kurdish. Where if you read this Kurdish history, you can find it a lot of the genocide against the Kurdish. They have like a Halabja, they have an Anfal, and then in 2014 they have the Turkish occupied Afrin. It's like a Kurdish area. And as they have like we have Dersim and Mahabad a lot. So, but now what's happened in Syria is like we have two city. Not in the Syrian in the Kurdish area, but they live in the Arabic area. The government and America and Turkey, they wanted like again Kurdish like and the government with some ISIS terrorists, and they have like a terrorist from Turkey as well. They wanted like again doing genocide against the Kurdish in the area, and they killed the civilians, the children, they even hated the children, and they have many people who is now is refugee. The refugee from long time, like when they occupied in Afrin, they coming from area to area. Like they have a 10 years. It's like moving from the area to area to Afrin to Deir Zor to Kamishli. They don't have a space to live because all the time they attacked them. And they have many people who didn't know where is it. And they wanted like a change in demography there. The space is a place is not stable, and they killed the people like not like just by gun. They like some guy they just like taken her heart and show them for the like he see his heart, then he's dying, and they like it. The people who is dying, like they thrown. You see the woman he's dying. They thrown from the high flat, and they taken like a woman. We have a woman revolution in Syria, in Rojava. The woman is fighting for their land, and they say they means like when they cut in her hair, it's meaning they taking the power of the women there. And they feel they are win, but they are not win. We have thousands of the women going to be fight for our land. The Kurdish in the area, they have a qasad, is like they say they helping another people as well to like they making group. Sorry, my English is not good. They working with another group, like they don't care. It's like if it's Arabic or this Christian, or they making army. It's like in the Rojava, all of them protecting together, protecting the area. In the Manbij, in Manbij and Raqqa, thousands of the Kurdish people is dying to protect in Arabic area. And when now is the Jolani is coming to attack our area. They taken down the statue of the woman who is fighting for them, or they die for them, and they don't want it like a revolution of the woman stay there, even the statue. Just to let you know, Qasad is not just Kurdish. As you say, it's like Arabic, Kurdish, Christian, like a different group. Now is we have like an ISIS problem as well in our area. They have like many present there, like more than 30,000 ISIS in present under the Qasad rule. But most of them is like free now because Jolani wanted them to free, and maybe some of them will be taken them to Iraq. Yeah, and the Kurdish wanted to help in another area as well. When they have they help in Idlib when they have like a fire there, and many areas in Arabic they help in them. We have like the ones that the government supporting Druze and Alawi is against them. Sorry, when the government against the Druze and Alawi and another group of the people who is supporting them is the Kurdish who supporting them, and they don't care about what the government they say. Now is America supporting terrorists in our area. And the Daesh is free, and the situation in Rojava is very bad. Even in the Kobani, the three area they surrounded by by the regime, as the new regime, Syrian regime, and another one is in Turkey. So we cannot even help in them. We can even no internet, no water. Some children just wanted just some water. They have some 5 children die because don't have because of the cold and because of the not electric and not food. And we want just you hear us. We see our situation. And America first who supporting us. Then he's like left us. He just using us. It's not like it's supporting. Thank you so much.
I think just to invite you all for coming and obviously to thank the Trades Council for this discussion. This discussion should be taking place in every town and village in Scotland by the about the far right and reform and how we welcome people. So more power to the work that the Clydebank Trade Union Council do, and I'm sure for all of the speakers tonight, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Yeah, kind of
Well, to be fair, I had a fair old rant the last time I spoke, so I don't have terribly much to add, other than to thank you again for organising this meeting. This, as Chris said, it should be happening in every town and village in this land, every community in this land. We all need to be having these conversations, and without them, nothing will change. I'll just end with repeating my plea to you. When you leave this room, just don't go away thinking that was a great meeting. I'm away to my bed now. Go away for this meeting thinking, what am I going to do tomorrow to change this narrative? What am I going to do in my workplace, in my community, to have the conversations needed to change this and wrestle this thing away from the far right? It's you that can win this. It wouldn't necessarily be people like me, or no offence, Chris, nor Chris. It will be all of us doing our own little bits in our own little corners of the world, but doing it in coordination and together and in unity. Thank you.
Just to thank everybody on the panel and yourselves as well. I think it was really interesting hearing about the strikes, and also I think we've got a lot to learn from Kurdistan. It's an alternative way of looking at nationalism, it's an alternative way of looking at how we structure our society, and I think that's really, really important. So anybody that's interested in looking at that, I would absolutely recommend it. I suppose what I would say from Clydebank Women's Supporting Women point of view is that we need stronger communities to stop this. And this is what the problem is. Communities are on their knees. The workers who are at the front line are on their knees. We have seniors making decisions that don't necessarily reflect the front line, and we seem to have a political class that's lost control. So I think that there's a real need for us to build our communities, to get stronger in those communities, and that's what will stop the far right, because when people feel safe, they're less likely to believe lies. So any way that we can do our bit to try and help our communities, I think is a key. The other political stuff is important, yeah, but as soon as people feel safe, they're going to be less nasty, let's face it. But thanks very much for me, it was long.
I'd like to thank the panel and thank the rest of you, for taking time out tonight. I know it's bitter cold. As for going home and going to my bed, I've been home to watch Emmerdale and Corrie.
And then the revolution.
Safe journey home.